Hello everyone and welcome to the next of our NQ Jazz podcast special Manchester Jazz Festival editions, featuring my interview with the fantastic Portuguese guitarist José Dias. In addition to being a fantastic improvising musician, José is also the curator of our silent film with soundtrack series on our Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/NQJazz, which has been a really fantastic thing for us to run. We've really enjoyed it and we're very grateful to José for his expertise in that. It's a really great interview. José is a very thoughtful and considered human being. He is very knowledgeable about an awful lot of things, and we delve into a whole range of subjects from the musical political landscape of Europe to his research, to his work with silent film, to his scoring the soundtracks for the Sesame Street Portuguese cartoons, to a whole load of stuff besides. So it's a really fascinating one. Please do take the time to come and watch. And if you are so interested, please follow the links below to check out José's albums and all of his other music and research activities. Sit back and enjoy the podcast with José. Lovely. Hello, José Dias, and welcome to the NQ Jazz podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
So, I suppose for the people listening, I should say you were primarily the reason we're doing this is because you were one of our Manchester Jazz Festival artists, which obviously the whole festival had to be postponed earlier this year, and you would have been playing an improvised soundtrack to Nosferatu, which would have been a huge amount of fun. But sadly, of course, not able to happen. But not only that, you are curating our film series that we've been doing through the summer, which has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed that. Hope you have too after all the work. And also, I should say, hopefully within the next month and a bit, we should be able to reschedule Nosferatu. So hopefully people keep your eyes peeled and we'll be seeing more of that. So to delve back then, how did you first become involved in jazz, music, improvised music, composition, all of these things? What was your first dip into all of that? And I should say, you're not from these parts, are you? So.
Yeah. So I'm from Lisbon, and I started learning the piano when I was 6. And that went till I was 12. Mm-hmm. And then you get to that age where you're looking for different things in music. And perhaps I wasn't the most disciplined student. So all of a sudden I thought, oh, guitar, that's really cool, and but back then, so this was the early 90s. There was only one jazz school in the country, basically.
Oh right,
yeah. So it was the conservatoire or this jazz school, and that's what I did. I started studying at Hot Club in Lisbon, and then basically started doing improvised music. Lots of different kinds of music, because back then in the 90s, and this is something specific to Lisbon, in the 90s, all of a sudden we had this amazing flux of people coming from Brazil, from Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, and it was just amazing. It was sort of a celebration of people doing different kinds of music, mm-hmm. and being from the same generation, and we were basically just falling in love with each other and falling in love with different Portuguese accents, because all these countries speak Portuguese. So it was just an amazing thing, the 90s in Lisbon. All of a sudden that also attracted jazz musicians from Europe. So all of a sudden we started having particularly German musicians and Italian musicians for some reason. Of course, the weather helps, the food, the wine. So it was an amazing decade, the 90s in Lisbon. And so that led me to experiment in lots of different kinds of music, and to create something that, it's not necessarily a genre or anything else. It's just what we did. And that was, I consider that to be my best school. That's where I really learned that, for instance, you don't have to have tension and release all the time in music. You can spend 20 minutes playing the same chord modal jazz or anything like that. And that was, that was really, really cool to sort of knock down those sort of preconceptions about music. That was really, really fantastic. So that's when I started to realize that, music was something else. I think that jazz schools are great, and I was director of a jazz school in Lisbon, so uh, I know what I'm saying. They're really great, but you really have to be careful, because sometimes um, jazz schools tend to think of themselves as these institutions that will make you into their mold. So you have to learn the canon, and you have to learn the Coltrane changes. Otherwise we won't give you the diploma. And music is so much more than that. It's really so much more than that. I think for me the big change was that learning music with musicians from other parts of the world, and having this open perspective of what music is.
It sounds idyllic. I'd have loved to hop in my time machine and jump back to 90s
It
Lisbon.
was amazing. It was really amazing.
And so at what point then did you've had this amazing time, amazing musical experience, and you decide the UK is now let's
I
leave
know.
it behind.
I know.
The wine, the weather, the food. At what point did you move over, actually? I'm not
4 years ago.
Oh, it's not recent, right?
Yeah. So basically, I'm also a researcher. So at some point, I decided that I wanted to think about my practice. I wanted to think about what I do. And back when I was head of a jazz school in Lisbon, JB Jazz, I decided, I should learn something about, running a school. So I started my master's, and my master's was all about, my research back then was all about, jazz education, and so that I could learn about that. And then I got interested into, okay, so now how do I connect with other musicians in Europe? And how can I, and especially being from a peripheral country like Portugal, I thought, well, this is really difficult, because I know I have friends in Belgium, and they can gig in Holland, and they can gig in in France and Germany, and it's all in the same week. If I want to do that, I have to really spend a lot of money flying there.
Sure.
So we're not competing in same level. There's geographical circumstances, economical circumstances, so that everything counts.
Yeah.
So I wanted to understand, how can I, sort of tackle this. And then I discovered an amazing Irish festival called 12 Points.
Yeah.
Which I believe and the first thing back then, Jerry Godley was the head of the festival, told me was, well, the thing is, we're in a peripheral country, so if we can't go into the the center of Europe, let the center of Europe come to us. That's how you do it. Yeah. Which I thought, well, this is Irish clever. This is really fantastic. Yes, that's what I should do. So that led me to pursue research, academic research, and then I did my PhD, and that's what I've been involved in basically trying to understand jazz in Europe, improvisation in Europe, also the connections between music and film and so on. And in 2008, as I'm sure you recall, it was this big crisis. And, some countries like Portugal and Ireland and Iceland and Italy and Greece were, really affected. Yeah. And so I decided, let's try my luck elsewhere. And yes, the UK is the best place to do research, in the world. So, I was really lucky to be offered a position here. So that's what I'm doing now.
Amazing. So I want to delve into your first of all. Obviously, there's a lot of strands to your career, but first of all, let's jump into the sort of the most straightforward aspect of the music, which is you've got I think 5 albums out as a band leader, one solo album and 4 ensemble albums. Is that correct?
Yes.
I may have missed something there. And it's interesting listening through to those because the scope does stretch from being, and I suppose it reflects a lot of what you're saying yourself, but starting from places of very strong melodic content and very accessible, catchy tunes, and with some of your writing, quite simple, accessible structures that you can play through to the right through to then a lot of freedom. And is that something that's mapped chronologically, or do you dip in and out as you feel fit? Now, have you found yourself
right? It's chronological. Yeah, it's an evolution, I think.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that I don't like melodies. I love melodies. It's just that and going back to coming out of a jazz school, you think you have to be fast, you have to play fast.
Hang on, you don't have to play fast?
I just found out. No. So, you come with this, I don't know, these preconceptions that you have to play fast, you have to, play clean, you have to, again, all those, know every possible changes, know at least 320, songs from the real book, and, So my first 2 albums were a bit about that, were about me trying to show that I could write melodies and chord structures and in 7, in 5, and change them, and that I could play clean and fast, and yes, it was all about that. And the first 2 albums were put out very close to each other. So one came out in March 2013, I think, and the second one 2 months after that. And the reviews were, they were okay, but they would say, "Oh, he's a really competent guitarist," or "Wow, we have another great Portuguese guitarist." Yeah. And I thought, well, that's great, but it's not. It's talking about they're talking about my technical skills. They're not talking about my music.
Sure.
So it's not their problem, it's my problem. So it's not, that they got this wrong. It's something that I'm not doing right. So I thought a little bit. And at the same time, I was starting to do these sessions, these improvised sessions for silent film. And that was really the trigger where I started to understand that it's not about playing fast. It's not about, really complicated things. It's about having a motive and having a concept. And film gives you that because there's lots of motives, there's action, there's narrative. Sometimes there's no narrative and you have to find your way through. But there's something you can, cling on to.
Yeah.
And music should be like that. So I started to, I decided that each album will have a strong concept. It's not about the music, it's about the concept. So the third album was about the 7 deadly sins. I decided, for some reason that I would look into the fact that I was, educated as a Catholic and that I have, this heart relationship with God. So I thought, why not? So yeah, it was about the 7 deadly sins. I didn't name, I didn't title the each composition as one of the deadly sins. People would have to create the rest of the story in their minds. And that's when things started to happen. That's when people started to notice and started talking about their music rather than how fast I could play or how well I could play or not. So it was about the concept. And yeah, the fourth album, the solo album, is about my relationship with film and silent film in particular. And the fifth album, um, it's which I really love recording it. It was recorded live, and it's a quartet with two sax players, a drummer, and myself, which is really challenging in terms of composition.
Yeah.
And that last album is all about interesting characters in Western novels. Instead of Lolita in Lolita, I think Humbert is much interesting than Lolita. So there's a composition about him. There's a composition about Tintin's dog. It was really fun to do.
Correct.
But again, things really started happening, and people now, I think, when they talk about my music, they talk about my music not just about, oh, I know a Portuguese guitar player and he plays so and so. So, and I'm really happy for that. I think that's really key. I don't know if it's your experience as well.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with everything you said, and yeah, there is a huge distinction between at the start of. I think it's a rare thing that people's first album manages to capture the reviews that talk about the music. Like you say, you see that with great young players in the UK all the time, but there are a few that terrifyingly well formed musical voices at the age of 21 coming on the scene, but they're rare for sure. Well, it feels like a great place to play the first track that you've picked out for us, I think, after talking through the album. So can you tell us a little bit about this track? So this is the Flickering Image Won't Go Away, off your fourth album, I think. Is that?
Yeah,
right? So
solo album.
Tell us a little bit about this track before we listen, please.
Yeah, so the way I recorded this album, I decided that I would record the entire album improvising for parts of films, so I decided to do that. And I decided to choose 4 short films by Man Ray, and basically I selected scenes that I really like because I'm really used to improvise for Man Ray's films. And so basically the Flickering Image Will Not Go Away is about a scene where there's this guy sort of having an episode, and he's sort of running away from that sort of light, and so it's my reaction to that. And a thing that I really love doing when I'm improvising for film is that I like to create contrast. So the scene is really almost frantic, but the music gets that, but at the same time there's like long notes on top of that sort of blend in. So it's about that. Sorry, I talk too much about.
No. That's perfect. And I mean, might be interesting as well. Maybe we'll link to the scene below so people can take a little look if they want to map it with the music. If they so wish. Anyway, sit back and have a listen. This is The Flickering Image Won't Go Away. Great, that was the flickering image that won't go away. I wanted to ask you then each of the tracks off this album you picked a different scene, but you were telling me that the scenes aren't actually included in the liner notes or anything. So unless someone actually comes and hunts you down or drops you an email or whatever, no one would actually know what the scenes are. What made you decide to keep those a secret?
And that's why I call the album After Silence, because it's what remains after the silence. It's after your experience of watching the film.
Mm-hmm.
Because each time you watch one of these films, and when it's good cinema, you get a different story, a different perspective. The same with good music.
Yeah.
So the idea is to provide this sort of my reading of a scene, but that could be different in any day. So why should I impose one interpretation? So it's open to your interpretation.
Great, yeah, no, interesting. And so, where did your whole interest in well, first of all, in silent film, where do you think the interest in that came from in particular, and then for yourself improvising to film, how did that all come about?
So by the late 1990s, I was composing music for animation. The Portuguese version of Sesame Street.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I know.
That's such a great gig.
Not the songs, but those short 1 minute or half minute long animation shorts that one's about the number two, the other one is about far and near and stuff like that. So yeah, I spent 2 years doing that, and by the end also for feature animation feature films. As part of that experience, I was invited to improvise in an animation film festival for some animated shorts with no sound, and that was it. When I started improvising for film, I was really completely addicted to it, and the reason being that it sort of puts you in the position where you're no longer thinking about all those technicalities like structure and motif, and it's not about that. It's about responding to something.
Yeah.
It's about listening to the others if you're playing with other musicians, and it's about telling a story or going against the story. And one thing that I think all of us jazz musicians struggle with, it's a really clever way of people not looking at you when you're playing. So people are not paying attention to you. People are paying attention, to the film.
Yeah.
And that sort of releases you from that, stress of having people looking at you and looking at your fingers. And there's always another jazz guitarist there, and he wants to look into your fingers and to see if you play fast and things like that. Yeah. So it sort of, shifts the attention to a screen. Mm-hmm. So it's all about the music. It's like you're playing, in your house with your friends. It's like there's a fourth wall, really. But at the same time, you're in a communion with the audience, because we are all responding to what's happening on screen. And then of course I love cinema, so the two things go together. And it's sort of started as this invitation, and all of a sudden I'm doing an album. I'm going to do at least another 2 albums with me improvising for film. With the trio that I have here.
Fantastic.
It was supposed to happen this year, but with COVID, thank you COVID. So we have to postpone that, but it's going to happen, and then a larger ensemble. So it's really, really, and at the same time, it's like going back to when jazz started. It's going back to the early 20th century, where you were sort of improvising again with no restrictions other than responding. And the more I research about that, the more fascinated I am, because I read recently that they used to have blind musicians improvising for film, which is really interesting, isn't it? Because they're not responding to the film, they're just improvising for that amount of time.
Yeah.
Which is really, really interesting. So it's up to the audiences to make the combination, even if it's a bit, doesn't go well. You have to sort of force your interpretation into it. So it's really, really amazing.
You know what that reminded me of? Those animations of like a little figure dancing, and no matter what tempo of music you play behind it, your head syncs the movements up with that tempo. It looks like it's perfectly designed for this speed, but then you put a ballad on, it looks like he's moving to the bar. You put your head is going to create the narrative no matter what.
And that's what we do with harmony, with motif. That's exactly what we do. If people, normally people don't know what the dominant chord is, but if you play one and if you finish on a dominant chord, people will know that's something wrong. You need something, after that.
Yeah.
So, it's all sorts of codes that we learn when we grow up. Mm-hmm. After a chord like that, I should hear another one that I know exactly how it should sound. Even if I don't know anything about music, I know that's the narrative.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
And so I saw that you've also composed for live theatre, as well as film, and for like contemporary dance groups. So how do you find the difference between scoring for, say, animation and then scoring for a live context? What do you see as the major things that separate those two fields?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think it has to do with texture. Because when you're composing for the screen, because it's a flat screen, you have to suggest texture.
Right, yeah.
When you're composing for the theater, there's texture. You can see the actors, you can see, their clothes, the colors, if it's wool they're wearing, or any other thing, any other material. So you have that already. Yeah. But with animation and film, you have to create that. You have to suggest also some kind of texture, which in silent film is really interesting, because sometimes you have that sort of grain in the image, and you can go along with the grain in the image, or you can sort of avoid that and play something really soft. Mm-hmm. And when you're composing for a live setting, as you said, especially with contemporary dance, I think that it's about creating different moments, because that you need a reaction from the audience. Mm-hmm. So it's like composing an album, but have in mind that you want immediate reaction from the audience. So it's about creating different settings, if you will. I don't know if this makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it needs more immediacy, doesn't it? Like you say, you need to have that reaction at exactly the moment the actor is begging for it from the audience, and
which is really difficult for jazz musicians, because we used to, I can play 36 chorus of solo 36 chorus before I really build up and have my climax in my solo. Yeah. But, if you're writing for cinema or theater or dance, you have to hit the cues. And for instance, with animation, one thing that that was really hard to learn. How do you, in 30 seconds, tell a story? Mm-hmm. It's impossible with music. Right? It's really impossible. Because in 30 seconds, you can create a motif but the idea of motif is that you repeat it with a slightly change. And in 30 seconds, you don't have enough time to give the motif a slight change and then go back to the original motif.
Yeah.
People say, wow, this was the experience of my life, because I had an idea and then something changed and then I got back to the idea. I'm reborn. No, you don't have time for that. So you have to play around with with how do you tell a story in 30 seconds, and it's really difficult. And it sends you back again to that idea of, it's not about doing, playing fast or doing really complicated things. It's about telling stories, which is the most important thing.
Brilliant. Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, I think this is also now a great point to play the second clip. This is a short clip, but this is a live one from NQ Jazz itself. From, I think, would this have been the start of last year? No.
Yeah.
And maybe mid last year, something like that. I've lost all perception of time, the passage of time in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
But at some point within the last 18 months, you came and played. And this was with Johnny Hunter and Paul Baxter, who NQ Jazz fans will be familiar with, of course. And this was for the film Metropolis. And so I can't remember exactly what point in the film this clip is taken, but so people will see the live experience of the improvised soundtrack and all of that. But could you tell us a little bit first, a little bit about the film, maybe, and why you decided this would be a good one to do live, and if you can remember yourself exactly maybe what's going on in the film.
I do actually.
Fantastic, perfect.
This film is basically about two different ways of looking into life, and it's about this dystopian world, which is not too far from what we live in now, where you have people living on the surface of the earth, and then you have another group of people living under. And those are sort of the workers that keep things going. But they're, of course, they are unhappy, they are exploited. So it's about those differences. A very Marxist film, actually. And it's one of the reasons why I like it so much. And the part we're about to see is the climax of the film, where the robot will come to life and become more human. So it's about that, about also the technology and how we use technology. Mm-hmm. So we're sort of trying to cope with that climax. And I really like this bit, and I'm so glad that we recorded it.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, sit back and enjoy this clip from Metropolis, circa 2019-20. Beautiful. So that was Metropolis, and a great night that was as well. We remembered that it was what's it? Is it just called Sunrise? The other film that you, Sunrise. That was such an astonishing film. I think that was the most captivated I've ever been by a silent film.
It's a beautiful film, a beautiful story.
Great acting as well. the lead lady won an Oscar at the first ever Oscars, wasn't
Yeah,
I think that, yeah,
really,
well deserved.
yeah. And from a German film, which is amazing.
Right, yeah, of course.
And yeah, and it's so great that uh, you guys um, were generous enough to take us
Our pleasure.
these film nights. They're just I really do think that film nights can bring different people, people who like cinema and just come from
Definitely.
the experience.
Yeah.
And also I really believe what I was saying previously, that this sort of brings us back to the beginning of
Mm.
the history of jazz and even pre-jazz.
Yeah,
So it's all about the music, not about a particular genre or a particular way of playing that genre or anything like that. So
absolutely.
so
And
I'm really grateful to you guys,
oh,
for
thank you.
allowing us to help tell these stories. It's just a great experience, I think.
And I suppose we should say, if things going according to our plans, and plans are transient things these days, but if things do work out as we hope, we should be running much more regular film series at our new venue, the Yard, which would be fantastic. So, keep your eyes peeled for all of that. I think one of the things that Emily's really passionate about with all that as well is it's such a great way to engage people who don't already seek out freely improvised music. Um, you can engage all of those people in the musical world without at all compromising on the musical content. You can be as free and expressive and in the moment and as off the wall or as tender as you feel, and there's this framework that takes everyone with you, which is brilliant. So yeah, it should be a lot of fun.
And film nights online, they've been
Mm.
great. It's amazing to see exactly that you were saying. You have people, really glued to the film and telling the story as it is, and people going completely
Yeah, yeah,
different ways. And there's no right or wrong way of doing this. It's just So it's been amazing. It's really
yeah.
amazing.
Well, like say with Adam Fairhall doing the Buster Keaton, you know, um, he hits the nail on the head with that sort of his wonky take on a period style, which is is so Adam, which is great. But that slapstick really, I think it benefits from the music really scanning closely a lot of the time because of obviously the nature of slapstick, but then with things like D Byrne and Elliot Galvin's soundtracks where they you know sort of just were exploring sound and texture, like you said before, it's a whole different experience. So yeah, it's been a huge amount of fun, all of that, and more to come. We've got we've got quite a few more popping out in the next few weeks, so very exciting. Look, so I wanted to delve a little into your research, which I know delving a little into someone's research is a bit of a that there's no real way to delve briefly in on a PhD's worth of thoughts. But so the publication that you did, the music practices, cultural identities, European politics, all that, is that directly from your PhD, or was that a separate branch of research that you did?
That one was maybe from my PhD research. Again, one of the best experiences I had in my life. I spent 5 years with 12 points, and as you well know, it's a festival that alternates between Dublin and another European city. So
It's a
that's what I did for
brilliant
five
setup for a
years.
festival. Yeah.
It's an amazing model. And it's really, really clever because it's not about big stars. It's the other way around. It's about new talent.
Mhm.
But again, what's new talent? That's a really interesting notion. So they play a lot with that.
Hmm.
And because they visit these other again, peripheral countries and peripheral cities, they sort of bring Central Europe and all around Europe to up to their doorstep, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the first one was about that, and also about Europe Jazz Network, which is an amazing and ever-growing network of promoters and independent musicians in Europe. And I'm also a consultant for them. So my work in research, I could say, is divided in three main strands. The first one is that one. So particularly festivals. And my view is that festivals are amazing laboratories to understand how jazz operates in that particular ecology.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, 12 Points was excellent to understand how European jazz works, because promoters from all around Europe would gather in 12 Points trying to sort of spot new talent. And the discussions around that were really interesting. So, in a way, 12 Points was or is every single year for 4 nights European jazz in one same place, which is amazing. And that, puts you in a really interesting position when you can observe different perspectives on what Europe is, for instance, what European identity is, and how people have different narratives according to the context in which they're speaking. Or, for instance, I always give this example. So you had this, I won't name them, but you had one Scandinavian big band, and they, in their own country, their own Scandinavian country, they would promote themselves as the place name of the country, best experience of that country's jazz. This represents exactly that very particular country and their identity. But then they got money from the EU. So they started saying, well, this is not exactly about this country. This is about European identity. So this band represents European identity. And then they got some money from the UN to celebrate Jazz International Day. So they said, well, this is not about Europe. This is about the world, because we remember. So it's really interesting to see how people will, create different narratives according to where the money is coming from. And that's just one part of it, of course. There's also, people with good heart and really struggling and doing amazing things in Europe, promoting the music they love. When you look into what people are doing in Greece, for instance, with no money, or Portugal, or Spain, or parts of Italy, or or Ireland, or it's amazing to see how people will get resources from where they don't exist. They will invent resources in order just to enjoy the music. So that's really amazing. And there's lots of solidarity between the countries, and that sort of gives you hope. And Europe, maybe this is what Europe is all about. So
yeah. Before we leave that strand, if you don't mind, and we'll come to the other two.
Are you sure you want to keep with this conversation?
Well, this is the bit that might get edited out in post recording. But if this isn't too vague and too charged a question, but where do you see the UK scene fitting in to everything you've just talked about? Because to me, it does sit on, obviously politically more so coming up, but it sits almost outside of a lot of that cross pollination that you're talking about, and obviously geographically it's apart. But you could say the same for Ireland, and they're trying to be much more connected. So, what are your thoughts on that? If you're happy to talk about that.
I remember interviewing World Service a band from London.
Oh, the World Service Project.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember interviewing them in 2011, and they're great guys, they're great musicians,
Yeah.
and they're really into Europe. But I think, and this happened in Portugal, where they had 12 points that year, 2011. And I remember, when I asked some of the members of the band, so how do you see yourselves as, European musicians? And one of them was like, so this is Europe. So it was like the first time he really had a contact with Europe.
Right.
And I think that
Yeah.
I see that in the UK. I actually do. It's a bit too isolated towards Europe, which explains Brexit and a lot of other things. But I remember, and when I arrived here, we were really in the really early stages of Brexit. So I remember I would hardly spot a EU flag anywhere. Whereas, where I come from, and the travels I go to Ireland, Austria, Spain, anywhere in Europe, you see EU flags all over. So that was the first,
Yeah. Yeah.
red flag. There's something different here. Also, I think UK jazz um, has gone through a really, really difficult period and process of detaching from American jazz.
Hmm.
Probably much more than other places in Europe, because big bands were placed here in the UK
Hmm.
during
Yeah.
World War II. And that's where they, then started touring. So there's that connection with trad jazz and swing and American jazz. And then what happened after that was the necessity to deal with colonialism and the fact that the UK was a colonial power. So how do we treat, these second generation black musicians that we have here in the UK? That was hard to swallow. So it's been a really rough process, probably
Yeah.
much rougher than in other European countries, where by the 1960s, 1970s, I think those countries were more at ease with their own history,
Mhm.
with their own past, and with this music. The good thing about European jazz is that it wasn't born here. So
Yeah.
it can be from Estonia, it can be from Italy, it can be from Dublin, it can be from Lisbon, it can be from anywhere,
Mhm.
and it's that sort of frees you to do whatever you want with this kind of music. But here in the UK, I feel that it's still quite heavy to say that you're a jazz musician, and the race connotations and colonialist connotations and the relationship with America, it's really heavy still. So there's lots of things that
Yeah.
need to be solved before I think see UK musicians are more connected and engaged with European jazz, I think.
Mm. And yeah, it's a, a lot to go and think about, to be honest with that. But another thing that's a real nuts and bolts barrier is just the disparity in European musicians. If they go on a European touring circuit, across the EU, generally, you can tie in a lot of gigs that will pay well and will cover your travel and your accommodation, and you'll get a really nice meal and you'll be treated really well. And then you try and bring the European group to the UK, and it's just so it's almost impossible to just make the gigs work. They can't afford it because the scene isn't supported enough, and the model is just completely different. So it needs more things like 12 points, a way to facilitate those things happening. But
and and uh, and some sort of network
mm,
that really works and bring people together. I know there's different networks, jazz networks across the UK. I know that in Scotland they're really struggling to, it's a celebration, is it a network? Then you have a federation and a network, and it's such a small place, and still they, but yeah, I think people must come together, and it's a country that lives from this sort of service, bringing people together, diplomacy. So it's I have conflicting um, thoughts about how, at the same time, it seems like this is an amazing country with an amazing human resources, and at the same time, it looks like people can't do anything really, solid that we can see in the jazz world. It's really needed. So
Yeah. Well, brilliant. So that was a long detour I took us on there. Sorry, but
and I'm sorry I was so,
no. That's what I was after. So thank you very much.
And that was the first.
That's the first.
I'll be really brief with the other two. So second strand is, of course, practice as research and improvising music for film. And we already spoke about it. And the third one, which I'm working on now, is on female representation in jazz.
Great.
Because it's something that should be addressed, must be addressed. And it looks like we're all going the wrong way about it. Like creating exclusively female quartets won't solve the problem. It's just trying to tick the box. And all female big bands, there's so many, like 30 women on stage, so we've solved this. It's not like that. It's not necessarily on stage. We need more women producing, like Emily's doing, producing, promoting, educating, and also on stage, not just singing, but also as instrumentalists. And that's something we really must address. So I'm working on that now.
Fantastic. So, and you also have a new publication out as of this weekend, even, I believe. What's that all about?
So it's about a Portuguese jazz festival, and the thing is, they bring together different things at the same time. So they have the national jazz schools competition, which brings a really interesting audience, because there's kids wanting to see their friends, and then there's the parents, and then there's the grandparents. So all of a sudden you have 3 generations watching, the competitions, which is great. At the same time, you have showcases of established artists performing with younger musicians. You have upcoming musicians. You have prizes. You have awards. You have this stand of Portuguese labels, but they're all mixed, which is really interesting. So you have side-by-side records from someone who just released his own album independently, and then a big label like Clean Feed, Portuguese label, side by side. So and books. So it's really, and it's called Festa do Jazz, which means celebration of jazz. Festa is celebration, so it's a celebration of that. There's debates. So it's a really interesting. Again, it looks like a laboratory, perfect laboratory to understand Portuguese jazz. And I believe that when you study a music culture like jazz, you're studying something larger. You're studying the society, the history, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
So, the book is about that. It has 3 chapters. The first chapter is about the history of Portuguese jazz up until 2003, when the festival was created. And then it looks at 15 years of the festival. The second chapter, and the third chapter is about possible and interesting challenges that the festival could address in the future, such as women representation and ethnic minorities representation, things like that. At the same time, the album is also has some interviews made by a very well-known Portuguese jazz critic, and has lovely pictures by a very famous Portuguese jazz photographer. And the design was made by the designer of Clean Feed. So it sort of feels like you're within a quartet and everyone's doing. It's I call it a jazz book. It's not a book about jazz. It's a jazz book because it's like feels like you're improvising with other guys. So it's really, really cool. Really happy with it.
Is it published in English as well as Portuguese, or just how is it?
It's published in Portuguese, but at the end of each chapter, you have sort of a short version of what happened in each chapter. But there's plans to publish it in English as well in the future.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, we'll link to all of these things we're talking about below anyway. So anyone who's interested, dive in at the bottom. But look, so that takes us right up to today. So what does the future hold for José, and what's occupying your mind and your time for the foreseeable future in these uncertain waters?
Yeah, they're really uncertain waters, and but I really believe in the power of music, and I think that music will give you structure in life. I really believe that. Some people think that musicians have no structure, and there are, artists are a bit. But I believe in the opposite. I believe that music will give you structure.
Mm-hmm.
So I have some plans. One of which is to record with the trio. I've been working with you guys, and I really would like to do that. So that's the next project. Another one is to work on poetry of some female poets in Manchester and
Brilliant.
in a gender balanced ensemble. So let's see how that goes in the future. I'm also finishing some songs. It's a commission, a cycle of 5 songs for children for the Portuguese. It's a Portuguese commission for the Portuguese Ministry of Culture. So I'm working on that now.
I think you need to find more things to do. You're just not keeping enough plates spinning. Well, José, it's been such a pleasure to chat, and thanks so much for taking the time to sit with us. And thank you, of course, for curating our film series. Pick some beautiful things. So, anyone who hasn't checked those out, I'll link to the playlist where you can see the teasers. But of course, you have to head to Patreon to see the full thing. So, we will see you over there. And José, have a good evening. We'll catch up again soon. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Hello again, and thanks so much for taking the time to tune in today, and a huge thanks of course to José for his time and his expertise. It was a really fascinating chat, really enjoyed it. Please of course follow the links below to check out José's recordings, and of course please head over to patreon.com/nqjazz to check out all of the rest of our digital programme, including our silent film series that José has been curating. We've had some incredible musicians involved so far, including Elliot Galvin, Dee Byrne, Adam Fairhall, Kim Macari, many others, so please do go and check those out. There's been some really creative approaches to scoring for these films, with many more to come, so please keep your eyes peeled for those. So, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you again soon. All the best. Bye bye.